What do you think of this predicament of yours? Caution. Case misunderstood. Polly says.
My friends, sit down, and don't bother standing up until this little campfire story is over. Trust me, it's gonna be worth it. The human mind is capable of many fantastic things, but today's game asks the question, what would you do in this situation? For the first time in a long time, viewer discretion is advised. Mouthwashing is an iconic horror game released on Steam that I never bothered to invest any time into. The reason being, when it comes to horror games, I mostly stick to the simplistic ones that we grew up with. I've found it really hard to want to buy a new horror game in recent years because they're mostly the same. However, after some pressure from some spoiler-free reviewers and reading some comments on the trailers, I caved. Like a human's mind, I could only handle so much pressure before my hull was breached and everything fell apart. I dove into this latest horror gem blindly, and I'll tell you right now, if you haven't played it yet, leave. No, I'm serious. Leave and go play it first. I'll wait. You beat the game? Good. So, do you remember when I said Dead Space 2 was the scariest game I ever played? Seems kinda silly now, huh? Where do I start? The beautiful ambiance, the pixelated graphics, the weird burned man in bandages, the fucking music and sound design, these are all wonderfully represented within the horror gem that many of you may now know as Mouthwashing. In this game, the player takes the lead role of Captain Curly, a veteran space pilot for a freighter company known as Pony Express. Being the head captain of the Tulpar ship, Curly's job has strained his ability to socialize properly with his crew, and the fact that he's been working under this company's jurisdiction gives him lots of superiority. Not much is known besides Curly having a relationship with each member of the crew, who are all introduced pretty early on. It's important to note that there's technically no voice acting. All of the story is told through text. I know this doesn't appeal to some by today's standards of a horror game, but I think it's perfect. It reminds me of an old school Resident Evil or Silent Hill title. Plus, it's the exact definition of a visual novel. I get to imagine what their voices sound like in my head. Well, good old corporate greed decided to make its move on Curly. To summarize, during the over 100-day course of your delivery quota, he receives a letter from Pony Express stating that he has been fired and the company is finally going under, which meant that all those years Curly spent devoting his time to delivering for them were for naught. This game encapsulates the awful aftermath of news such as this. At the very beginning of the game, your first goal is to cause the ship to inadvertently wreck. I'll briefly introduce each of the crew before continuing. Jimmy is the co-pilot of the Tulpar, and unfortunately, Curly's right hand in the pilot seat. You will mostly be controlling him throughout the story, as it is his job to step up to the plate and take on the role of captain for these poor souls who are doomed to a fate worse than death. Jimmy's not a saint by any means, and it's apparent with his very strong dialogue at times. Besides that, the player is led to believe he really does care about the fellow crew members. He just never planned on having to babysit. Daske, and please forgive me if I said that shit wrong, is a young intern who never really felt a certain calling in life, but instead tried multiple career paths in hopes to make his mom proud and make a living. He's charming, excited, full of energy, and very optimistic. There's a nice scene in a flashback where he gets stuck in some insulating foam, but he's not even the slightest bit scared. A very well-developed character, Daske should technically be the comic relief if one existed on this fucking hellhole. His name can actually be translated to assist or help. Then you have Anya, the Tulpar's nurse, who unfortunately claims she never finished the courses that were assigned. She's probably the only one who shows any sign of worry or emotion, which is crazy considering some of the things that happen later on. She tries to hide her emotions often, but it's hard when she's the one interacting the most with Curly, and clearly wrestling some sort of mental stress that she doesn't elaborate on in the beginning. Oh yeah, did I forget to mention that? Curly survived. Not only did Curly screw everybody here with his unannounced suicide mission, he screwed himself too. And I'll say this, I know the graphics are pixelated and retro on purpose, but the first time I saw Curly's reddened, limbless, lifeless body, my jaw dropped. There were even times I physically looked away. Stuck without any use of his limbs and forced to be in constant pain, Anya continuously feeds him painkillers in a limited supply. What a fucking joke. The man who literally tried to rob us all of our futures in the absolute worst way possible, and he survives the crash. So in hindsight, you're taking care of a dangerous moron who has sealed your fate. Too bad. I'm not alone in thinking that. Another member of the crew, Swansea, is a crotchety old man who has years of experience with Pony Express delivery under his belly. Yeah, that big belly, right there. Being the most hard-headed and rudest person on the ship, it doesn't take long for the player to realize his often dangerous and belligerent behavior. One wrong word it seems and he's pissing and shitting himself, yelling and screaming at Jim for being wrong or stupid. Sounds like my dad. In reality, I've worked with guys like this so many fucking times, and I really enjoyed Swansea as a character. One can imagine the pressure Jimmy has in this situation. At first, he's the only one we can relate to. In a way, the player is forced to care about him with his decision to rise to the rank of captain in order to possibly salvage the ruined mission and, though highly unlikely, attempt to save what's left of his crew. I can't really say I wouldn't do the same. Imagine if you were driving a massive ship full of someone else's china cabinets and you hit a big rock. Now the captain's dying, there's glass everywhere, and everyone's dancing on the shards just to feel something, and they look at you to figure it out. In this beautifully horrific narrative, your choices matter to an extent. But let's start with the very beginning and how it all falls on the shoulders of Jim and his crew to maybe stave off the inevitable and tend to their dying captain's needs as long as possible. There's no heads-up display, no radar, nothing. Like a true horror game, the player has to figure it out themselves. Locations can easily be memorized due to the lack of space on the ship. Insulation foam has ensured that even the cockpit is inoperable. There are signs placed along the tollbar to get you used to navigating the vessel. It also helps that a few areas of the ship are detailed and gone over in certain flashback segments. These exist to push the narrative and help bring the player up to speed with what's going on. Often you are viewing the flashbacks through the eyes of Curly. Though he wasn't necessarily a perfect captain, the first half of the game does a pretty good job of showing the good side of Curly with his heart-to-heart discussions with the crew. During these flashbacks, it's clear that his behavior is deteriorating somewhat, but he hides the darkness within himself as to keep up the facade for his team, or perhaps out of denial for what he refused to accept in that moment. It's mentioned that Anya gave him a brief psych evaluation before the delivery began, a mandatory check on his mental status as a reliable pilot for Pony Express. He restates the same answers as last time, which worries Anya right off rip. He also reveals a sensitive side to Jimmy, who doesn't really reciprocate the same energy. During Jim's psych evaluation, the captain brings up his troubled past as a lowlife, but still compliments Jim and attempts to sympathize for him to no avail. This upsets Jim, and even makes him seem jealous, mentioning that Curly is the best captain out there. After spending majority of his time as a captain, he hoped it would lead to some sort of grandiose reward, and instead he was sent a letter by fax which stated this would be the last one they ever embark on. It's no wonder why Curly felt what he did was necessary. We've all been pushed to a certain brink a time or two, but what would you do if you were Curly? Remain calm and complete the delivery, or finally collapse with the company that you depended on for so long? Well, as I mentioned, the game does lots of time jumping. The story is told in a non-linear way, and interestingly enough, there's not exactly a good guy in this situation. Everyone is miserable because you're all certain this is the end. Jimmy holds a lot of pent-up aggression, bottling his emotions yet letting some anger out from time to time. This is especially showcased when Jim has to uncomfortably take care of Curly. It's pretty obvious that he holds massive resentment to his previous captain, and in some instances is tested by his willingness to help everyone. One of the most horrifying things I would have never imagined is having to feed a crippled, burnt, dying shell of a man some pills just to feel better for a brief amount of time. There's only a certain amount of painkillers left in the medical bay. When the story calls for it, Jim has to grab these and forcefully open Curly's mouth, inserting a pill into his throat. The audio is awful, and it has burned a permanent image in my brain that I didn't want or need. The whole game does a fantastic job of making the player see and do unusual things to get by, or perhaps seem a little more human. Funny, because as the game goes on, you feel way less human. I like how in the flashback sections, the gurney where Curly lays has a digital screen background of a beautiful blue sky, but whenever you're playing as Jim, the screen is focused on a sun setting, indicating that sanity and time have officially vanished since the beginning of this mission. The game overall does a fabulous job of making you feel isolated, lonely, and worst of all, helpless. Stuck on their adrift vessel for months now, the crew meets to discuss a plan, and this is where the game begins. I like how Anya asks Jim why Curly did what he did, and Jimmy straight up says it doesn't matter at that point. Well, shortly after the crash sequence in the introduction, they decide that the best course of action is to break into the cargo hold and salvage whatever they were delivering for supplies. The only person with clearance to the cargo bay is the captain, who has access to a tool known as a code scanner. It's an integral tool that Jim uses through the course of the story, revealing codes to unlock things around the ship. The code scanner was left behind in the cockpit when Curly crashed. Jim heads there to find the scanner and brings it back to cargo. When he arrives, the team is waiting for him at the bay door. Eager to find something useful, they stand back as Jim opens the warehouse bay. Right then, we get yet another flashback sequence. You're supposed to be Curly, I think, and there's an ominous television with static sitting in the distance. Then there's a really catchy and neat infomercial that plays, an advertisement for something called Dragon Breath Mouthwash. On the top of the bottle, the writing reads, "Kills 99.9% bacteria." It's a 24-ounce liquid bottle of sugary, useless, 14% ethanol dental cleaner. Nothing less, nothing more. Well, turns out that's what we were transporting. 5 members of the Tolpar, the last manned vessel for the company's fleet, sent far into space for 300-something days, and their cargo the whole time was nothing more than a warehouse load of fucking mouthwash. Damn. If that isn't a slap in the face to everyone playing this for the first time, I don't know what is. It's not even the fact that your cargo is so dumb and mindless from a delivery standpoint. It's the amount of fucking mouthwash inside the ship. Every single one of these boxes is packed tight with this stuff. I loved seeing everyone's reaction to this rather upsetting news. Swansea, suddenly tempted by all of the bottles, immediately begins drinking one. This is fucking horrifying, considering how low the crew seems to be. We all know that mouthwash can't be ingested, and from personal experience, I can tell you nothing feels worse than accidentally getting some down your gullet. Seeing this grown man chug a bottle of mouthwash out of desperation to feel something made my stomach turn. Anya is in shock and begins to have a breakdown, crumbling over the thought of their cargo not being something useful like tools or extra parts to repair the ship. It's a very reasonable crash out, in my opinion. Daisuke remains optimistic, even joking that the mouthwash will help everyone's breath stay fresh. Jimmy suggests to everybody that they avoid ingesting the poisonous chemical despite how tempting it is. To you or I, this concept seems ridiculous, but imagine being in their shoes, abandoned by the company after so much time has passed since the wreck, and this is the first new or different thing that has broken up the monotony for them. In any isolated situation, humans are pushed to the brink of what they're capable of, and then some. I don't think it's that unrealistic to assume that one of, if not more of the crew, would inevitably drink the mouthwash. And this ultimately sets the tone for the rest of the game, as things go far downhill from here. During another flashback, Curly walks into the lobby as he's surprised by his crew. Each year, they get one communal birthday full of fun and excitement while also seeing to their necessary duties on the ship. Curly, having just found out about the company's closure a week ago, struggles to be happy at his own party, and feels a heavy sense of guilt knowing he will soon tell the others that they're out of a job. During the party, you have to bake your own cake using the code scanner to solve a puzzle. Imagine having to tell friends that you've worked with a long time that the company is done and you're shit out of luck. No reference for future careers or employers, no nothing. There's a subtle comment that Curly makes to himself. If you approach the Pony Express Polly statue, he says to it, "You're not going to make it out to pasture." When the cake is brought to the table, Curly unveils the cold water. I know I mentioned this earlier, but I'm going further into detail now. He tells them that the company's going under, and soon they'll all be jobless. Everyone's upset, but Jim in particular seems to be the most aggravated with Curly, downright insulting him for avoiding the crew for so long and regretting to inform them. It's here that the player sees a bit of an uglier side to Jim as he lectures everyone else. Being the player, I can't help but feel awful, as if I'm one of the fucking crew sitting in that room with them, pissed off and speechless. But to be mad at Curly, that's a bit low for Jim in my opinion. While I agree that Curly should have told them when the news was received, I don't think it necessarily made him the one at fault. The company was doomed to fall apart at some point with the replacements of most manned ships being exchanged for automatic ones, and now we have a situation where everybody is suffering, including the man who caused it. Jim wakes up as 3 months have passed since the crash. Something is making a horrendous noise in the distance. A series of pained gasps, uncomfortably raspy breathing, and a shivering echo of pain fill your ears. You already know what the sound is, but your mind tries to blank it out as best as possible. Curly's laying in his bed, suffering from an intolerable level of pain. Jim walks in but can't give him the painkillers until he finds Anya to ask if she already provided them. This leads to Jim finding both Anya and Swansea in the cockpit of the ship, secretly discussing something. Anya is crying, but says she forgot to give Curly some meds. When Jim gets back to the crying Curly, he doesn't make things much better. He says very odd things to his former captain and almost comes off like he's insulting the poor guy. Jesus, Jim, just give him his fucking medicine already. Do you really think this weirdo speech is necessary right now? Anyway, there's another dream sequence where Jim and Curly are sitting in the lobby of the ship. The big screen that once contained a peaceful sunset is now split into cracks and branches of destruction beyond repair, with a huge error message. Jim and Curly sit to talk about the cake on the table, in which Curly gives a speech about how they should enjoy the cake even though it's bland. He says that amplified the effect of the better tasting stuff, and relates this to how they tried to escape the ship together, only for it to end in disaster. This scene feels really important and disturbing. I hated seeing the massive piles of empty mouthwash bottles stocked up like Mount Everest. At the end of this dream, Jim grabs the fire axe from another room and swings it into Curly, only for the story to continue 4 months after the crash. Daisuke is sick, lying on the floor with a bottle of mouthwash. Knowing that it does nothing to affect his mentality, he begins venting about how his mother always viewed him as a delinquent, someone who was unimpressive and never wanted to do anything. He even says that he doesn't want her to blame herself for what happens to him. That's really sad, but really good storytelling. Checking on Swansea, Jim notices right away the fat man is intoxicated, and you'd better believe he's singing. The camera work is pretty cool, and the environment itself has gotten even more cluttered with junk, garbage, and of course, mouthwash bottles. The food supply has been broken into by, gee, I wonder, and things are looking rough all over. Jim approaches Anya, startling her. They talk about drinking the mouthwash when Anya mentions a hidden medical supply just outside in the medical bay hallway. Jim can access it by breaking apart the insulation foam, but he needs the axe. Swansea, still in his drunken dance, hesitates to hand it over. He eventually caves, but not before smashing the screen with the tool, cracking and splitting the image. Oddly enough, the screen now somewhat resembles an eyeball. Jimmy uses the axe to carefully remove the foam from the emergency med supplies. One wrong move and the hull could be breached again, killing everyone and cutting this tragedy short. Once it's opened, he collects the bottle of pills, a bottle of pure alcohol, then speaks to Anya. This is a strange moment because Anya asks Jim to give Curly his medicine once again, But in response, Jim is pissed off and scolds her for constantly coming to him instead of solving things herself. This was extremely out of character for Jim, and it made me question the ethics of his mind at that point. On the screen, there are texts that flash by quickly, saying, "Take responsibility," and "Take care of it." This doesn't look good. So, Jim wanders back into Curly's room, fueled by rage for having to waste precious resources on a dying man. This time, though, you still have the alcohol in your inventory, which reads, "Potentially deadly to ingest." With absolutely no exaggeration ever, this was the most shocking decision I've ever faced in a horror game. I mean, what the fuck is the right decision here? Should you poison your captain, despite all you've been through, and possibly end his misery with an awful, poisonous death? Do you take the fire axe and split his head open to stop the madness? Or even worse, do you feed him mouthwash just to punish him for his mistake? All of these outcomes are horrid, but the game doesn't care. You have to make a choice. And whether or not it was the morally correct one, I don't care. I, myself, as the player, could never sink so low as to envision harming someone who's already lost everything. In a somewhat heartfelt impulse, I chose for Jim to give Curly the medicine. Trust me, I stared at the screen for a long time, just scratching and pulling my fucking hair out, wondering what I was supposed to do. Jim says to his former captain that it wasn't his fault for being under such immense pressure. He even says that Curly was a good captain despite all they went through. And in that moment, my respect for Jim was granted yet again. Suddenly, there's a point in the game when you're flashed back as Jimmy, and Swansea is trying to break into the cockpit to attack him. In a sporadic flurry, Jim searches the room for some rope to hold the door closed. Swansea breaks in, only to cut right to Anya and Curly discussing the night sky image on the lobby's projector. I must say, the tone and constant switch of emotions are displayed effortlessly. Things can happen in a twisted and horrible way, such as Swansea breaking into the cockpit, just to cut to a wholesome scene like this where two seemingly normal people are just trying to relate to one another. The anxiety within the ship feels all too real, and you're always on the edge of your seat with this narrative. It's fucking fantastic. So now, we're 5 months into the crash aftermath. Supplies are running low, and the lobby looks like a stampede of animals came through it. There are mouthwash bottles littered everywhere, and trash is scattered in various stinky piles. Daisuke approaches Jimmy in a panic, claiming that Anya is stuck inside the medical bay. Desperate to save her, the two of them run to the door. Jimmy talks to Anya, but eventually figures out that the door is just locked from the inside, which worries him. With Anya and everyone else on edge, she could do something harmful to herself, or worse. The only other way inside is through the utility room vent. Unfortunately, my bad for not mentioning it sooner, Swansea has the utility key and guards the room at all times, claiming that it's full of insulation foam. Each day, he claims to have been picking away carefully at the foam in order to clear the room and see what they can use. He's very strict about letting anybody inside, so what happens is, Jimmy hatches a crazy plan to drug Swansea using a mixed alcoholic beverage. After giving it to the disoriented man, he gives a very heartfelt speech to Daisuke. I'll be completely honest, I welled up pretty bad here. There's nothing that breaks me more than seeing an old man at his breaking point, and his words have never felt truer in this circumstance. The writing, alongside the excellent style, is just phenomenal. I believe these characters work for this fictional company on a fictional ship, and I'm fully invested. I can't count on my fingers and toes how many times my jaw dropped or I had to look away from the genuine horror that was displayed to me. These people don't deserve to die. And the way they all suffer during the game's runtime is realistic. It's just scary in that sense. It's a tragedy at the end of the day. After tricking Swansea into drinking the cocktail, Jimmy and Daisuke sneak into the utility room, only to find it's not covered in foam at all, nor is it remotely as damaged as the drunken fool had said. There's a cryostasis pod inside the room that's still operable, and Jimmy quickly accuses the passed out pariah of trying to use it to save himself. Daisuke urges Jimmy to wait until he wakes up so they can properly talk to him and get an understanding of why he lied, but instead, Jimmy manipulates the poor kid into going along with his plan. What the fuck, Jim? A few minutes ago I was rooting for you. Where the hell did this come from? He tells Daisuke flat out, Captain's orders, you have to do it in order to save somebody. The vent is dangerous with hanging live wires, and Swansea has reminded Jim thoroughly before not to use that vent until it's properly fixed. Ignoring this, he sends the kid inside only for things to go terribly wrong a second later. Daisuke somehow gets critically injured in the vent. Bleeding profusely, Jim panics alongside a drunken Swansea, still recovering from his delirium. When Swansea suggests using the alcohol that Jim found earlier, he reveals to the old man that they used it to drug him. With nothing left to disinfect Daisuke's wounds, Jim is forced to try mouthwash. But in order to get mouthwash, Jim first goes through a strange hallucinatory process of evading an invisible threat. You have to use the code scanner in order to follow the blood on the floor, but you're informed pretty quickly that if you run, you get caught. Whenever this thing comes close to you, as indicated by the sound design, you have to remain still. What the hell is it after all? Well, you can unfortunately see this monstrosity using the scanner, and it's a floating horse head. Unlike the mascot of the company, this one is detailed to mimic a real horse as it sneers at you while inspecting your being. I have no idea why, but I'm terrified right now. After you solve this short segment, Jim takes the mouthwash and gives it to poor Daisuke. And it's just as bad as you think. This is when we get yet another flashback. Curly is looking for a gun just a day before the crash happened. He finds Anya hiding in the cockpit, who confesses to Curly that she's pregnant. Alright, it's time for the huge ball to drop on this video because things get way fuckier as we go along. Keep in mind, Jimmy was the first person to rise up to the rank of captain after telling the others what happened with Curly. Something the player never did was ask themselves, why are we playing as Jim? What happened before this? Well, we finally get an answer. With this impressive shot of a cowering Anya surrounded by darkness, further implying her descent into madness, we find out that Jim sexually forced himself onto Anya, impregnating her, and forever causing tension in the relationship he shared with Curly. Being the great fucking captain that he is, Curly learns of the gun's location thanks to Anya and hurries to confront that sick fuck. Unfortunately, Curly's mindset must have been at an all-time low. For the very first time, we see what Curly looked like prior to the crash. Jim manipulates Curly into letting him take control of the ship, promising to do the right thing by everyone on board, and bringing an end to their useless struggle in the workforce. In reality, Jim was using this as an excuse to avoid confronting the baby that he was inevitably going to father at some point. Once Jim sets the course of the ship towards its impending fate, Curly quickly sprints into the cockpit in a vain attempt to prevent the crash. As you get to the seat, there's an impact. What a massive fucking blow to my gut. My attitude towards Curly has taken a massive 180, and I gotta say, Jim is a real piece of shit. Props to the developers for coming up with this outstanding twist in an original horror game full of great mechanics and an even greater story. I was not expecting this at all. Time goes by, and Daisuke's condition unfortunately worsens. Just then, Swansea takes the fire axe and drives it into the kid's face with powerful force, ending his suffering almost instantly. In just a few quick flashes of what seemed like seconds, Daisuke has been put out to pasture. Jim scolds Swansea and tells him he broke into the utility room and found out about his plan. Probably not the best time to mention that, Jim, but sure. Swansea reveals that there isn't a plan and that they're all doomed. If Jim absolutely wants to, he can use the cryostasis for himself and conjure up whatever bullshit story he can think of if somebody ever finds him. He also hints to Jim that he knows about Anya's assault. With the door to the medical bay unlocked, Jim heads inside to discover the corpse of Anya, who has overdosed on the rest of the painkillers meant for Curly. It's a fucking horrible sight to see. The case with the gun is sitting just beneath Curly's body, and the very first code that was unveiled at the beginning of the game is the one that unlocks the case. When you obtain it, Curly lets out a wheezy, dramatic laugh. I can't even imagine the pain he has been through both physically and mentally, having to witness his crew tear each other apart slowly, all because of one man. Jim manipulated everyone on the ship in order to get what he wanted, and now Curly is quite literally laughing in his face. Perhaps to indicate that he knew all along what kind of man Jim was. He just was too good of a captain to let him go. The rest of what I'm going to describe, I think, is a depiction of Jim's descent from reality because none of it makes any fucking sense. What happens is, Jim gathers all of the corpses to the main lobby in a twisted birthday party setting, carrying Curly into the room and placing him on the table. Then, his leg is amputated by the player's mouse movement. It's diced up and served on little plates for everyone to enjoy as their haunted corpses compliment Jim for his tremendous work as captain. This is the most disgusting thing I've ever seen, but it's so fitting for Jim's dark personality. He has these sick, twisted fantasies. He deserves to rot. You thought it was over? No, it gets worse. There's an awful puzzle immediately after where the player has to use these valves sticking out of Curly to adjust his intestines. That way you can force feed him... Oh god, I can't... Oh god. There's an awful puzzle here where the player has to use these valves sticking out of Curly to adjust his intestines. That way you can force feed him a piece of his leg without him throwing it back up. Yeah, I don't know if you needed a warning or not, but here it is. This shit's gross. The decay of Jim's mind due to his jealousy over Curly, the fact that he assaulted Anya and impregnated her, used Dasuke's bright personality against him, tricked Swansea into drinking, and his job ended so suddenly. It was a cataclysmic event with an everlasting effect. If Jim weren't on the ship, this would never have happened. Holy shit. When you finally figure out this nonsensical torture trap, Jim is shown walking through an endless void of space. There's a melancholic ambiance at play, and suddenly the horrors that we just bore witness to are forgotten in an instant. Curly, burning in the distance, watches as his co-pilot comes forth. This is a mere hallucination from Jimmy as he justifies his actions to Curly, who reciprocates with the most respectful decision, taking the blame, taking accountability for not stopping this mess sooner. Much like earlier with the floating horse head, there's another puzzle involving a chase. This crazy contraption of recycled poly mascot parts acts almost like a centipede. Dare I say, a horseipede. I really love how it moves and screeches as it crawls away from Jim. Whenever it kills you, it stops dead in its tracks just before lunging at you. Absolutely horrific. I love it. In order to beat it, you just have to avoid looking at it. In the end, Jim is approached by Polly, the mascot for Pony Express Delivery.
I know what you think of You really mean that, Tom?
When Jim says, "I fucked up," it's gotta be the most heartbreaking realization, and it came way too late. In an extremely dramatic scene, Jim places Curly into the cryostasis pod. If I had to briefly sum up the entirety of the events I had just witnessed, I'd lie to you and say it's impossible. Truth be told, it stretches beyond a realm of insanity or craziness. Even psychosis wouldn't touch this game, that's how scary it is. Mouthwashing is the perfect horror game. I'm sure at this point you're probably never going to want to play it yourself, but I have to insist that you at least try it. There are a few things I didn't mention about the story, and interesting puzzles for the player's mind to wrap around. The mind-bending narrative, the focus of how one crooked mind could destroy so many others, and the daring task of asking the player, what do you do? It's all fucking perfect. Mouthwashing is the most horrifying game I've ever played. No exaggeration. The question is, are you willing to see these awful situations through to the end? Are you able to go back and change certain factors in hopes of a better outcome? Or are you doomed to fail, much like the crew of the ship, which Curly tried his best to save from the madness and jealousy of Jim? Like night and day, it's crazy how consistent the themes are. Jim is the dark black hole of this universe. Curly is the star shining ever so bright, yet conflicted by his mistake of not doing the right thing by Anya and getting rid of her attacker for good. Though both men made mistakes, I really liked how they each met their end. The constant symbology of the ladders being shown, indicating that Curly has fallen far off of the top, all because one person felt he didn't deserve it. While playing this game, I annoyed the fuck out of Kat simply by trauma dumping the lore, mainly because it's so graphic yet effective at displaying true isolation, delusion, and psychotic, realistic scenarios and moments that you'll never forget. It'll force you to take a look in the mirror and ask yourself, did my worst moment make me a monster?